Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Frances Steed Sellers, a senior writer here at the Post. We're going to be talking today about a timely topic, the future for women in Afghanistan. And I'm delighted to welcome two guests to share their perspectives. Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Judge Najla Ayoubi, Chief of Coalition and Global Programs at Every Woman Treaty. Senator Shaheen and Judge Najla, a very warm welcome to Washington Post Live.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
Senator Shaheen, I'd like to start with asking you, Senator Biden yesterday declared victory, saying that the withdrawal had been an enormous success. Do you agree with his assessment?
Well, I think the last few weeks have been an opportunity to get out over 120,000 people from Afghanistan. That was more than I thought we were going to be able to do. Obviously, we didn't get everyone out who I think needs to be out. There were some people on our list who we were working with, so they were not able to make it out. So there is unfinished work to be done, and I hope we will all stay committed to ensuring that anybody who wants to leave Afghanistan, whether it's a special immigrant visa applicant, whether it's women who are threatened, women and girls who are threatened, or other groups, that we will continue to work to see that they can leave the country.
And Senator, have you spoken to the president since the withdrawal? And if so, you have this ongoing concern about women's welfare. What are your assurances going ahead that your messages that you've been putting out for some years now are being listened to?
I have not had a chance to speak with President Biden, and I don't know that we have any assurances that our messages are being listened to. As you point out, this is something that I've been talking about for a number of years, particularly when the prior Trump administration was negotiating with the Taliban. I raised concerns with former Secretary Pompeo, with Ambassador Khalilzad, that women were not represented at the table, despite the fact that we have legislation on the books signed by former President Trump that says in conflict areas, women should be at the negotiating table when we are negotiating the end to the dispute. And those messages fell on deaf ears. So now we are dealing with a situation where women and girls were not represented at the table, and there are no assurances for them going forward.
Thank you. Judge Najla, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what's going on the ground. I understand you've been in touch with people from the country you left in 2015. What are you hearing?
Thank you. Yes, it's devastating stories coming out. Particularly, I'm hearing I'm daily, almost 24 hours in touch with many of my fellow activists on the ground in Afghanistan, which many of them is still on hiding, changing their locations, but there is no way, as Senator Shaheen mentioned, that there's no way for them to get out. Also, I think I already mentioned in from the beginning of the changes of the government in Afghanistan, that lots of stories coming, very chilling stories for the common woman, women and girls in Afghanistan, that there is no only Taliban that they are fighting in Afghanistan, but also others are coming, extremists coming, and they are actually have been told that they will be given Afghan women as a property. And also women and girls were forced to be married. Families were forced to marry their daughters to Taliban. Women put on fire because of the bad cooking. But at the same time, stories post-withdrawal is also coming, that violence against women have been increased even among the educated women because they lost the income and they have been dependent to the main family members, as well as most of the criminals have been released by the Taliban when they came into power. Many of them have been criminals, particularly on violence against women. And now they're after the people who, after the survivors and after the victims, and as well as after the people who helped them as part of the revenge. Depression, helplessness, hopelessness, and also fear is very high, particularly among the women's rights activists. Child marriage, even from my previous experience being lived under the rule of Taliban, now the increase of the early and child marriage and forced marriage because of the families want their daughters to be someone else's responsibility because they cannot provide them, they cannot afford to keep them safe and also feed them. Also, a lot of concern right now. Just this morning, I heard that several women workers in one of the provinces, I don't want it to name because I don't want it to put these women in further in at risk. But they have been told that they shouldn't be showing up tomorrow at work because they will be sent home by food because they are traveling actually, but they will be sent home. So means that there are lots of stories coming, and also I have a huge concerns of about the women's and girls' education and work and also freedom of movement because now the fear is very high and unfortunately there is no proper solutions. And as Senator Shaheen mentioned that unfortunately we had not enough women on the negotiation table and on the peace talks to be bringing the women interest and girls interest.
Judge Najla, I have one quick question to add this before I go back to Senator Shaheen, but do you see any positive signs that the Taliban has changed?
We have to distinguish between the Taliban in Kabul and also the Taliban out of Kabul. So in Kabul, probably we see some of the, I'm not saying positive sign, but these are how their PR is working, how they work and to show to the international community. But at the same time, on the ground, yes, unfortunately, these chilling stories are coming. We hear from the provinces, and at the same time, I think that's also another piece that I wanted to add. That they wanted to, they are saying that the women will be allowed to go and study and also to be work based on the Islamic law permit. But unfortunately, we don't know which Islamic law permits, which Sharia law permits. This is the actual one, or this is the Taliban version. That's the piece that's really concerning me.
So, Senator Shaheen, if you could help us step back a little bit. Funding has been frozen from the US, from the World Bank, from the IMF for COVID right now. Does this mean that there's a moment of leverage? What's the US rescue plan, if there is one, and do women fit into that?
Well, I hope so. I think that's part of what we need to do is to assure that any economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, as we're looking at diplomatic recognition, that is all conditioned on what we see from the Taliban and how they treat not just women and girls, but other minorities in the country and what they're doing about human rights and just basic necessities that people in the country have. And as Judge Najla has said, the reports that are coming out right now are very mixed. There's real concern. We're hearing that women are being told not to report to their jobs around the country. And the excuse that's being given is because of security reasons, they can't be protected. But it's not at all clear what that means and what that will mean going forward. It's not clear what the situation is with opening of schools and whether girls are going to be allowed to go to primary and secondary schools, but also to universities. The Taliban has said that they will allow women and girls to go to university as long as they're separated from men. But again, as the judge says, that's all dependent upon Islamic law and what Islamic law they're talking about.
So, Judge Najla, you've mentioned some of these other problems, and you touched on mental health concerns there. Could you talk about some of the broader challenges that women are facing on the ground now in this terribly insecure moment?
First of all, as I mentioned earlier, because I hear from my very strong activists on the ground, I'm not talking about the general woman or general woman population in Afghanistan, but I'm hearing from my fellow activists that they are depressed, they are helpless, they cannot help themselves, not only themselves, but also they become dependent. That's also a kind of a way of how they see themselves being independent women, and all of a sudden entering to the situation where they have to be dependent to the male family members. Meanwhile, I heard from some of my fellow judges. I was talking like 2-3 days ago. They say that they have been showing up into the work, but unfortunately, they have been told that we don't need you. Go home. We don't need you. You go home and you relax. And if we need you, we will call on you. So it means that this is a humiliation for the women on the ground, that they have been in power and they have been providing the rule of law in the country. They were enforcing the laws in the country. Now they are the victim of being violated. And I think those are the issues that really, another piece that I'm hearing, that the banks are closed, unfortunately they don't have access to food or to healthcare services. I think these are the issues that it's important for not only the Americans to know, but also the global community to know what can be done from now on to help 18 plus million women on the ground.
Senator Shaheen, I know you wrote a letter in the middle of August and had some bipartisan support there, expressing concern for women activists in particular, and that may now, I guess, some of that may be moot. But do you see a moment now to get bipartisan support to continue putting pressure on the administration to advance the rights of women in any way they can going ahead?
I do. I also think it's important, not just for the United States, but for the international community. We need to keep a focus on what's happening in Afghanistan. Even such basic things as freedom of movement are being denied for women unless they have a male escort. So that's a clear return to what we saw when the Taliban were in control before 2001. So we should have real concerns about what the Taliban are doing right now, what their plans are in the future. And the leverage that we have is what's been discussed: economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, keeping a focus in the international community on what's happening in the country, and particularly how women and girls are being treated.
So talking about the international community, there's obviously people seeking to leave the country, and immigration is going to be a problem. European countries I know are facing this. What prospects are there for people, and women in particular, seeking asylum?
Well, I have been encouraged by the number of countries that have been willing to step up and provide a safe haven for people as they are being evacuated until they can be processed, who have been willing to say we can take a certain several thousand refugees. Countries like Germany, North Macedonia, Albania, Qatar has been very helpful as we've been looking to evacuate people. So obviously we need to continue to work in the United States with our allies to ensure that that continues, and to continue to process as many people through the visa process as we can, so that we can get people resettled. It's not good enough to have them out of harm's way. We also need to see that they are someplace where they can reestablish themselves and become permanent members of the community.
Judge Najla, in 2015, you left. I'd love to hear a little bit about your own story, why you chose to leave at that exact moment, and a little bit about resettling.
Thank you. Yes, 2015, actually, I and my family have been a target for many years. I lost my father and my brother. Both have been assassinated because of being active in supporting women and women's rights and women's education. So that's one of the reasons that unfortunately I was one of the women's rights activists that have been always on the target list of the extremists in Taliban. And I have been receiving several times death calls, threaten calls, and as well as the death threats. Even the form and the type of the attack that it had to be carried out against me was also provided by our some security offices in the country. So I was hiding for around 5 to 6 months here and there, and then I had to come to the United States because this was actually I came to stay for a few months until the dust will settle and then go back because violence against women and working on women's issues as my life work. I wanted to go back, but unfortunately the threats is still there and I couldn't go back. But it's still in the past 6 years, I'm just waiting for my first interview to be done. Even being in the country that has a very highly developed country, but unfortunately I'm on the waiting list for my first interview to happen. So there is a lot of challenges, even if you go out and you are in a safe place physically, but mentally you are not safe because you live in a limbo. You live in a uncertain situation. You don't know whether you will be accepted in third country or not, or in the second country or not. That's also another challenge that we human rights activists are facing. And I'm one of the examples that I have been facing so many challenges in the past 6 years, but still I'm fighting and I'm not giving up, and I born a fighter. So particularly for women's rights and never give up. But I wish the people who are coming, they have to be a very thorough and very timely process for their cases, that what I have gone through, they shouldn't be going through. So it was a very difficult, though I knew many organizations, many people in this country. I'm really, really grateful for the people. And until I got to the Every Woman Treaty, and I found my really community and people who work and we share the same vision for the global policy change, which definitely affects everyone, every woman on our planet.
Thank you, and thank you for your courage. Senator Shaheen, you have obviously visited Afghanistan. You've seen and spent time with a generation of women who grew up without the Taliban. What do you think the hardest things are going to be for them about this change that they're now facing?
Oh, I think almost everything is going to be difficult. You know, I had a meeting. I was last in Afghanistan in 2019 before COVID, and I had a meeting with a number of women leaders there, and they were a very impressive group. I'm sure Judge Najla can speak to that. But they said a couple of things that really impressed me. One woman talked about how she knew at some point they would need to work with the Taliban, and she was okay with that, even though they had threatened and killed members of her family. But she was willing to forgive as long as they were willing to be accepting of her and other women. And I think there would be an opportunity going forward if the Taliban actually were willing to stick the kinds of statements that they have made in the last few days about changing, about accepting what has happened over the last 20 years in Afghanistan. Of course, it's not at all clear that that's the case. One of the other things these women said to me and have repeated in recent months after President Biden announced the decision to withdraw was to make sure that those of us who are concerned about what's happening in the country are speaking out about that we're using every forum that we have available, that they want to see the president talk about it. They want to see the Secretary of State talk about it. They want to see other elected officials who have a platform who can help hold the world community's focus on what's happening there, to ensure that they are not forgotten and that there's every effort made possible to provide futures that have opportunities, the kinds of opportunities they were hoping for before the Taliban retook the country.
You authored the Women, Peace and Security Act, Senator Shaheen. It makes women's role in negotiations, conflict and peace negotiations, so important. Tell us where the future of that lies, what you're going to be doing, and also you're speaking out. You wrote an op-ed in May saying that we cannot afford to give up 2 decades of advantage for or advancements for women. Tell us how you're speaking out, what you're doing legislatively, what the next steps for you are.
Well, first of all, I want to point out, and I'm sure we would all agree with this, that ensuring that women have those opportunities, that human rights are protected for women, isn't just about doing the right thing. It's also about doing what's in the best interest of families, of communities, and of countries. We know countries that have empowered women are countries that are doing better economically, because we know that women, more so than men, much more so than men, and we have data that shows this, are more likely to give back to their families. Whatever money they earn goes back to their families, it goes back to their communities. And that's good for communities, it's good for countries. And so this is not just about doing what's right, it's doing about what's important for the future of Afghanistan and other countries where women have not been empowered. And we know that data shows that when women are at the table in negotiating an end to conflict, that those negotiations last longer, 35% longer. We have data that shows that. So this is about doing what's in the interest of the world community. And what I've been doing to try and ensure that we continue to support the Women, Peace, and Security Act is to ensure that we have funding for those gender roles that are working with our State Department, with our Department of Defense, to be embedded in areas where we are working around the world, because we know that this is good for everybody. It's good for the communities, and it's ultimately good for America, because it's in our interest and in international interest to see peace, to see women who are empowered around the world. And it's interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Taliban do when they lose 50% of the brain power of their country.
Right.
How far they're going to go if they refuse to allow women in the country to have rights, to work, to have advancement.
And I would love to follow up with a question for Judge Najla about the men whose wives have been working and the children who've grown up with mothers who've been educated. What role do you think they can play, or are they beginning to play going ahead now?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yes, of course. I wanted to ask you about the men whose wives have been educated and the boys who have grown up with mothers who've been educated and are very different role models from when you were growing up. What role do you think those men and boys can play going ahead now?
One thing that is important, because the important part is that the change in the mindsets of the men and boys are happening. We have the data that it shows that the changes in the mindsets of the men happening between the age of 9 to 22. So it means that if we provide the prevention education on violence against women and girls through the different communities and through different platforms, I think that's something that can help. Unfortunately, if we were doing this before, we were not ending up to having these extremist group deeping root into the country where the women have to pay the price. But yes, the role models I can see in my family. We are a family of 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and we have been educated, all of us. And I see my nephews and nieces, they are really looking up to their mothers and fathers because they see them equal. So from now on, I feel that the educated men and boys that they are still in Afghanistan, they could really help the current generation and the future generation to help them understand how the importance is the women participation in the society, in women role in building the society, in bringing the welfare, bringing the prosperity in peace in the country. So that's my point. And also another piece that unfortunately the girls' dream have been abandoned right now. That 3.5 million girls were enrolled into the system, but unfortunately their dreams have been taken and abandoned right now. So how these families and men and fathers and brothers can help them. Even my experience under the Taliban, we were having underground schools, and we were teaching the boys and girls at the same time. So this can be another aspect, but we really need. These are, unfortunately, we cannot solve one by one cases. We have to do a universal system change that it will respect men and women at the same time. And at the same time, I would really recommend and urge international community to please, first of all, pay attention to these women's rights activists that they are stuck in the country, and at the same time with their families, and unfortunately they don't have anything and anywhere to go and anywhere to turn to. So that's my point basically, and I think many of these men and women also can help in the future to make sure the women participation is guaranteed.
Well, thank you. Senator Shaheen, I think this has to be my last question. I sort of want to make it a bipartite question and look in a very focused way on the last 48 hours and then talk about the last 20 years. But the last 48 hours have been such a whirlwind. Have you any specific concerns or hopes that come out of this last 2 days? And then looking back over the past 20 years, are there benefits that have come from this 20-year involvement in Afghanistan that you see going ahead, particularly with women in mind?
Well, certainly over the last couple of days, there are people that we worked hard to try and see if we could get them out who did not make it out. And so I'm concerned that we continue to work through the State Department, through whatever avenues are available to try and ensure that those people who still want to get out of Afghanistan are able to do that. Over the long term, the mission, we originally went into Afghanistan to try and prevent the freedom of terrorist groups to operate and attack the United States. I think most people would agree that that mission has been accomplished, at least for the last 20 years. And there were a number of other benefits for people in Afghanistan that happened because of the United States and other NATO countries' involvement. Healthcare, the school system, the ability of women and girls to pursue their dreams and opportunities, the success of so many men in Afghanistan because of that support from the women in their lives. So I think most of the people from the United States who have served in Afghanistan, whether it was on the civilian side or on the military side, feel good about the efforts that they made in the country and feel sad that all of those efforts over the last 20 years are now threatened.
Judge Najla and Senator, thank you both very much for joining me today. Judge Najla for sharing those intimate insights, and Senator Shaheen for putting them on a national and global stage. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me on Washington Post Live. Check out WashingtonPostLive.com for future programming. I'm Frances Steed Sellers, and thank you.